Brothers and sisters, MBs and non-MBs, a moment of silence for the dearly departed. Games have been completed and moved on to the next realm. Amen. Okay, so I'm doing a post-mortem video on the game that was completed. Basically what happened was I basically stopped doing videos on the game development process right around the halfway mark of the 1 month development. And I realized I couldn't really do both the game and the documentation process of the game. I did record a lot of footage and I had a bunch of extra footage and I was going to edit a bunch of videos after the fact and have this little, kind of like a post devlog kind of thing and kind of just narrate over the clips and just, talk about what happening here and blah, blah, blah. But I kind of got demotivated because the game is already done, right? And they sort of the catharsis, I guess you could say, the post-jam kind of excitement has died away, and there's maybe there's some people who are interested in the videos, but I just wanted to skip to the post-mortem process. I was gonna do a condensed video of all the rest of the things, then do a post-mortem, but I don't know. I just wanted to do the post-mortem because I also lost a bunch of project files from Adobe Premiere, even though I said to autosave and it didn't autosave. And anyway, you know the deal. So I'm gonna do not a top 10 what I've learned, but more of a top 10 what I experienced or how something went. Because I think when people say oh, what I've learned, kind of thing, it's kind of did you learn it, or because I feel like a learning process is sometimes subconscious, and just because you narrate that you've learned, XYZ, doesn't always mean you actually internalized it. I don't know. I feel like we try to make up a narrative in our minds that we oh, I've leveled up, I've done this, blah blah blah. So I'd rather just be a little more neutral about it and just kind of go check on my outlook on certain methods and how certain aspects of the project went, and that'll be kind of the post-mortem aspect, I guess. I don't know. So not only did I do a game, but I also did a devlog/dev diary where I basically recorded myself making the game and just giving you a glimpse of where everything kind of came together and stuff like that. I wasn't really sure what I was doing. I was kind of picking a format and then kind of changing the format that kind of suited the process. I was trying different things. I was trying to get used to recording and then putting together stuff. It kind of went from just off the top of my head kind of recording and then into fully edited, fully, here's everything. I have to go through everything. I have, I can't condense it. I need to, every detail of the game development process might be interesting. And then I got a little carried away with it. I wish I knew what to do with that. I'm still kind of unsure what is the best, because part of me likes doing edited content because I think it's a little more digestible for most people. Whereas all right, here's just the uncut, the raw, the rawness of game development, of me just sort of talking over footage. Might not always be that entertaining, or it's just hard to get through the juicy stuff. I don't know. I think what I kind of realized a little bit early in was that recording myself and then talking in the moment, basically recording myself in the moment and then talking about where the project is at the moment, what I'm thinking and what's in my present state. I think that kind of taps into what I want out of this personally, which is basically okay, what was I thinking at the time? What was my thought process? Because I might not always remember what that was, I don't know. It's kind of interesting to think about. So I think I might lean towards that if I ever do something like this again. Because I can record it just that, in the moment, on the spot, not really worry too much about editing it later. And then B, it's okay, this actually, it's one thing to talk over something post game jam. It's another thing to be able to talk during the moment. I think that's really key and important. So what I'll do is I'll just record myself at certain moments throughout the game jam process that I think is notable, and then sort of make dev diaries after the fact, I think that's what I want to do, because I just can't imagine editing together something during the jam, unless it's just sort of like I'm uploading a 10 to 20 minute video of me just in the moment talking about where the project is. I think it might have to be like very bite-sized and very sort of, I can edit it together in like 30 minutes basically tops. So yeah, I don't know. I still kind of want to do sort of stuff like that, but definitely not for like 48-hour game jams. More for the monthly ones, because those are a little bit more like lengthy. And yeah, at some point I didn't even like really record towards the end. Like there's footage that I just don't have of like the final moments, because I was just like, I can't think about this right now. I need to get this game done. I need to get the export build out, and like make sure it gets on the HIO and all that stuff. So it's just like really hectic, and it's not really the place for not everything can be documented, like just the way things are. But I think I got a lot out of the video editing process, just forcing myself to just put myself out there and stuff like that. So I don't know, I'll definitely revisit this idea. Okay, so the placeholder process is sort of a method I've been kind of developing from the last couple of game jams, where I try really hard to kind of not worry about making a finished thing right away. I just sort of place in assets, or placeholders, you could say, where like the game isn't really like fully formed, but it's at least I can always edit it later. Basically, the point is it's easier to edit things rather than to start things. Like making a new scene, or a new room, or a new cutscene, or a new character, or a new like anything. Just think of anything. It's really hard. It's actually like, maybe it's just how my brain works, but I find it very daunting to kind of like, it's hard to motivate myself to just sort of like make the next thing. So I try to get the placeholders in as soon as possible, where the sort of hard part is sort of done and over with. But the problem with placeholders is that like you set yourself up to complete the rest of everything, right? Fortunately, I think the process went rather well for the most part. It's just that like I had to just rush things towards the end to just get every single thing done. Like I was just like, all right, I'm going to skip NPCs. There's only going to be one NPC in the entire game, even though I kind of like set up at least one NPC. There were some placeholders that I felt like should have been started way earlier. Like basically, there are things that were just like not started at all until the very end, and I was just sort of doing it for the first time. Like, yeah, the NPC would be a good example, where it's just like, all right, I'm going to put an NPC in the game, but there were no NPCs until like the last week, basically, so I should have like started that way earlier. And yeah, there's just like sort of like, the second half of the game jam process should be that I'm just filling stuff in, I'm just editing stuff in. Because it was pretty easy to make the final boss fight. Like, I already had cutscenes, I already had a battle system in place. All I had to really do was just like swap the regular enemy with the final boss, and that was kind of it. But yeah, it's hard to phrase my own process, because it's my own internalized kind of thing that I'm kind of working on, and I don't feel like I'm at liberty to like really discuss. Maybe I'll make a tutorial someday on like what the purpose of placeholders is. But you see a lot of placeholders in game development, but it's also easy to make placeholders that you're going to scrap anyway, and such. The point of the placeholder isn't really helping much, because you thought it would just be, all you had to do was just have this in here, but it turns out it's actually a lot more involved when it comes time to actually like edit and expand and elaborate on a placeholder. So sometimes it's a hit and miss, I think, and I'm just kind of getting used to that process. I don't really have any conclusions from it other than, should have done the NPCs a little earlier, should have done, the even the treasure chest, even the menu actually was super late in development. The menu was so late. I don't know why it was so late. I should have done it like at least a basic form of it early on, because it was pretty stressful putting that together when there's like 4 days left or something like that. So anyway, I think the placeholders went pretty well regardless. Alright, so Dialogic and cutscenes. So yeah, like basically what it really came down to for this project was to get the cutscenes done. Because when you think about it, the goal of the game is to just get to the top of this area, the final area in the game, and meet the final boss. But before that, you have to have another cutscene triggered, which is meeting up with BB. Then you can like unlock this little gate in front of the final area. It just turned out to be that like two particular important cutscenes were required for the game, basically. Originally, I was going to have an extra one where you'd have to backtrack to the beach and kind of like power up the sword there. Like you'd meet up with BB, talk to the sage, then go back to the beach, and then do this ritual thing where you power up the sword. But I just decided to do it all in one cutscene. Like even even when it switches cameras, even when it like changes to the sword thing, it's still the same cutscene. It's still the same like script and everything. And I use Dialogic to make all the cutscenes. And Dialogic is, I like it a lot, but there are some things I wish I was doing all on my own, like the way the text box looks. You can change the visual makeup of the text box, but it was kind of hard to modify it so quickly during the jam. And I just sort of stuck with a very basic boilerplate kind of looking one. And I quite like the interface for Dialogic. It basically exports to JSON files. It has like a sort of, it resembles RPG Maker a lot. I really recommend it if you're kind of coming from RPG Maker and you want sort of, because like building cutscenes in RPG Maker was actually pretty well done. The only exception, of course, is like having the move event command is like the worst thing ever. But other than that, like, yeah, it's like, it's kind of really good for recreating that kind of environment. It's not for everyone. I think some people prefer like other methods and tools, but there's also the case of like, I want to, you know, make it so that it's like a little easier to do branching. I think branching in this is a little convoluted. There's some hangups I had with the Dialogic plugin, but for the most part, like it just worked for the game jam and I wouldn't mind using it again. But I would like to look into almost disregarding the like actual default text box that it provides you. I just want to get rid of that functionality and just like modify it in my own way. I just want the text. I just want the output of the dialogue string and the like name of the character and all that, and that's about it, you know. Like otherwise it's like I just want to trigger animations. Oh yeah, I guess another problem was like emitting signals. So sometimes I would have to disable the input for some reason in order, so like you can skip text in this game. You can just mash the confirm button and go through all the text, which is nice. However, if you do that, you can actually get rid of the wait command. So if the cutscenes are like, okay, wait 6 seconds for this animation to pass over, then it's going to be like, okay, well, like, you can skip over that wait, potentially. So I had to make a custom command that would say, disable input. You can no longer press the confirm key anymore. So you couldn't, you know, skip the wait. But you could also, yeah, I had to re-enable it so that you could go through the text again, so the cutscene wouldn't be in like total limbo. So there's some hiccups. I think 1.0. The funny thing is, I made a suggestion about Dialogic in the actual GitHub repository, and it got fixed. And they released 1.0 before the game even finished. Like I was on 0.9 Dialogic, and they basically like updated it before the game finished, and it was like, oh, you know, I mean, obviously I'm gonna use 0.9 because it's just not a whole lot of time to update it and all that, but you know, it was an interesting development throughout the jam, was just sort of watching this plugin still being worked on, even though I was kind of using it at the same time. So, you know, so it says something about the resourcefulness of how tools are kind of always being worked on, and they're also organic just as much as your own development process. So. Oh yeah, I wanted to talk about the music. I didn't really get into that too much because it's like handled by someone else, but yeah, I worked with Calberry, who is the composer for this game. I think the music turned out really great. It fit the vibe of what I was going for, and there's some interesting like tidbits. Like she spent most of the time working on the battle theme, and not just the battle theme itself, but the guitars for it. The guitars were just, you know, like, we're not working out for her program. I don't know. She explained a bit of it during the jam, but it was basically like she couldn't get them to sound right due to her program, like just not like listening to her. I don't know. She had some issues with that, and you know, like a lot of time was spent with that. When you'd think it'd be like, oh, the soundtrack must have, you know, been a lot of work, and it's like, yeah, it was, but like sometimes just the small things that just become the large hiccups, and you know, I noticed some parallels in my own process too. I especially like the final boss theme. That it seemed to be like just cranked out in like less than a day, with like 3 days left in the jam, you know? And it was just like, I was really surprised of how well it turned out, you know? And yeah, it was good to get the gesture theme, that sort of gesture battle theme, I guess you could say. there were some like aspects of it where I was like kind of worried, like, oh, if the battles aren't long enough, would they be able to hear the entire song, kind of thing. And I was thinking this was like meta, kind of like thinking about the stream more so than just like someone's enjoyment of it. I was wondering if Kyle Bossman himself would like, play long enough, but anyway, it was just sort of like, it was kind of funny how I was like trying to think about like how to get the music their kind of spotlight, like at first the victory theme would just cut out because the battle would just end prematurely. Like there was no like winning message at the end of the battle for a while. And so I was like, oh, I should just at least add a "you are victorious" and then let the player confirm themselves, so that there'd be a little bit of, you could listen to the victory track loop basically, because there's it's like one of those considerations where I was like considering the music more so than the actual functionality of the game, and it's just like but I think the music turned out well. I think it got its its share in the spotlight, especially during the stream, and the battle theme really killed it. Okay, so this isn't really documented. There's not really video footage of this. But when it came time to export the build, the Godot build, meaning that it's no longer just a bunch of files and it's actually compiled into an exe that the user can click and the game will just hopefully run in front of their eyes. I had some really bad issues with just exporting the game, just at all, because Godot is just kind of like, it's like my third Godot game. It's kind of like some learning pains, I guess you could say, but also just like in general, just like, I don't know, Game Maker, RPG Maker, even Unity especially, is pretty good about just like, all right, I just want to put the game into an exe and bundle it, put it in a zip file, whatever, and just send it out as soon as possible. I gave myself like, I'd say about 3 to 4 hours to do all that, but it just became a nightmare because another thing was like, for some reason I was seeing bugs in the final build that I was not getting in the editor or even the debug build. A debug build is basically just, so theoretically the difference between a debug build and like an actual like non-debug build is that debug build just has, an error log or just prints whatever gets printed or whatever. But the non-debug build was getting bugs that weren't in the debug build or that I was getting when test playing the game through the editor. So it's really frustrating that like just knowing that I can't debug something that's a bug only in the non-debug build. You know what I mean? It's like, it's so stupid. This shouldn't be my problem, right? The game should be exactly the same as it is when I export it into the final thing. It just doesn't make sense to me. It's just chaotic. It's just, so I ended up just going like, hey, you know what? I'm just going to release the game in the debug build. So if you were to download the game right now, you'll click on the exe, the game will pop up, but behind it, if you Alt-Tab or something like that, you'll see like this sort of error log message. Just ignore that, pretend it's not there, or like full screen the game, whatever you want to do. But I just hate the idea that's sort of the compromise if I were to do like a bigger, more ambitious project of Godot, to have that like weird error log thing there. Or just like, I don't know, I would have to look into the actual like how to fix that build situation. But I don't know, it's just one of those things that's like making me not look at Godot in a good light. Maybe it'll be fixed in 4.0 of Godot, but it's just something that's like a big, huge negative that I shouldn't have to worry about exporting the game. I shouldn't have to worry about the exe. That's not my problem as a user of a game engine that's sort of supposed to figure that out for you. You're supposed to worry about making the game, not worrying about like the specifics of like the compiler and all that stuff. It just boggles my mind, So I'd say this would be like my third or fourth RPG I've made, but I used to dabble in RPG Maker a long time ago, and I used to make a lot of projects that would never get completed. But this is sort of like my first game with me like actually programming the actual base systems of an RPG. So it's like it's very different and yet very familiar at the same time. It's a very weird experience because it's just like, normally in RPG Maker, the battle system is already made for you. You can just sort of dive right in and sort of worry about the balancing and all that stuff. But when you get to make everything yourself, it feels, you know, it's obviously going to take a little bit longer, but I realize that there's some pros and cons to everything where it's like, I mean, you get to control how every aspect of the game works. I had a lot of ideas for the system though. You know, I was like, oh, I'm going to make Grandia. But the thing is, like, what makes Grandia isn't what I really put into this game. It's mostly, I mean, right now it's just like you can attack and then you can use items and you can live or die, and that's kind of it. You know, there's a bunch of cutscenes and story and all that, but the battle system itself, and just like sort of, you know, looking at it, there isn't really a whole lot of like things you can do with it, unless I add on to it, which was the original intent was that like you'd be able to interrupt enemies basically out of their animations, or you could get interrupted and you would get like sort of this ego kind of sliding effect where like, oh, if you get interrupted, you'd lose ego. If you interrupted them, you'd gain ego. So it's sort of like this resource or economy based around like timing your attacks in such a way that they would interrupt enemy attacks, and you'd also be able to control how you would get there. Like you'd have I was thinking of having Yunki, the sidekick character. Basically he'd be able to be activated whenever you wanted during the battle, like whenever in between turns or during a turn, you could just tell Yunki to slow down an enemy for a set amount of time. So you could have like this sort of, you're kind of like controlling the flow of the battle in a way, instead of just like watching the bars fill up or the timer go up, I guess you could say. There's gonna be this whole dynamic going on. And another crazy idea I had was like, basically you would have a skill or a move that would like launch the enemy in the air, and it would like pause them for a bit or whatever. But when an enemy is launched, I was thinking basically if like BB would have a skill where if the enemy being targeted is launched, it'll be an instant like attack, basically an instant kind of like move where BB would like go up in the air, grab the enemy while it's being launched, and like throw it into the ground, like this sort of like combo attack thing, which basically what Grandia 3 does, kind of, but a little bit different, a little more interesting, a little cool animation, but obviously super ambitious, super crazy, just, you know, and, you know, like every game jam's gonna have its compromises, but I guess what frustrates me is like, yeah, there's compromises, but I would like to get to the part where I would actually compromise. Like there wasn't even a chance for the battle system to really show its unique colors, right? And if there's going to be any compromise, like, oh, it didn't work out the way I thought it would, well, I would like to know whether or not it would work out in the first place, right? Because all I have is just like the basic attack and items, and it's just sort of like, it's almost like I didn't really make this. It's, you know, it's like starting a thesis in like a thesis statement in an essay, and then like not actually addressing that statement. You know what I mean? Like you start talking about like apples and stuff, and you didn't really get into like, I don't know, the farmer's market that the apples are in. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It just feels very like I didn't get a chance to really answer questions for myself about the battle system I had in mind, of like being influenced by Grandia and all this sort of stuff. But maybe I can turn into something. Maybe I can take the existing game and turn into another game on its own, and basically save time by like not making the battle system from the ground up all over again, and just sort of like adding stuff onto it and having all the ideas that I want to put in. You know what I mean? I don't know how I'd go about that though, because it's like either with no deadlines, it's really hard to finish projects, and I already have a bunch of other projects I want to tackle, but I am still kind of interested in this sort of tackling RPGs basically, because I'm kind of in this weird boat where I'm like making horror games, but I'm not like 100% there with them these days. I'm kind of more interested in RPGs, so who knows where I end up at this point, but whatever. So that's it for the game I worked on, but there's also a bunch of other games that were worked on as well during the game jam. It's easy to forget, it's easy to get into tunnel vision and not realize that, yeah, there's other people working on it, because I'm very used to the game jam format where you go to a building somewhere and you make the game at that building with a bunch of other people who are also making their own games and their own teams and their own, it's very physical and very closely knit, and you can see their faces and all that. You get a sense that they're actually there. Of course, that's like a pre-pandemic thing, but yeah, like basically at the end of Game Jam, we would just have a projector on the wall, and we would just present our games on the screen where everyone can kind of see, and there's this whole like ceremonious kind of event that really brings the Game Jam together beyond just, oh, I made a game, here it is, blah, blah, blah. And the Kyle stream is basically kind of like that. It's like the closest thing without, actually being there kind of thing. And I really enjoyed the presentation. I really enjoyed all the games. I didn't play all of them myself, but I did watch them get played. And I really got a sense of like all these cool different ideas that everyone did. And like there's even like coincidences that I saw in other projects that were also in mine. It was really like amazing. I don't know. I really like the prompt. I've loved the concept because I feel like with most game jams, there's usually just a one-word theme, and I usually just ignore it, or I just figure out a way to make it work because I'm just not that inspired by one-word themes. But when you have a very complex rule set to the game jam where you have to actually abide by the rules, like have a jester character that you fight optionally, it's just like it's so crazy. But it's like it's also very like, oh, okay, yeah, I have to really think about this. Like, how should I go about doing that? Like, and I think just there's just enough limitations in there that are interesting, and you still get a lot of different results and a lot of different ideas and a lot of different interpretations of those things. And there's sort of this weird shared universe thing going on, like almost like a mini MCU kind of thing happening within a game jam where no one is like collaborating directly, but like in a passive way where everyone just sort of has the same prompt, but they have a month to just sort of work it all out, and then you get this weird, like inconsistent but also somewhat consistent universe going on. So I really liked how everything turned out, and it was really cool, and it was actually a really good payoff. I think game jams should always be about the payoff. Like, yeah, you finished the game, that's great, it's a very good personal achievement, but what about like other people? What about the entrance? Like, I feel like game jams work when they have a very communal feeling to them, as opposed to just sort of, being at your computer all day and just kind of working on a game on your own. I'm a very lone wolf kind of productive person. I typically do solo projects a lot, but I still get a lot out of when, time to show off all our games and we all get to watch them together and sort of comment on them and talk about it afterwards, and it's still a really great feeling. And yeah, I love the format. I've done 30 plus game jams, and this is like one of my favorite ones. Honestly, it's like one of the better ones. So yeah, I hope there's another one next year or so.